Well, it sounds like once again Xbox is considering yet another pivot as they continue to evaluate their business plans. It's not just their own internal games that they want on other platforms, but rather it's also that they want to open up Xbox in a very interesting way that also opens up their ecosystem to even more games, which ironically might even include PlayStation games. Yeah, this is kind of a bizarre twist, and it would be a crazy turn of events if they could somehow pull this off, and we'll get into all of that today. Then also Capcom responded to some of the Dragon's Dogma controversy with some updated plans. Now, will this be good enough though? That is the million-dollar question, and well, stay tuned and we will cover that together. To get things started off, though, we're going to go and talk about Sega and the future of the Sonic franchise. They do have Sonic and Shadow Generations set for later this year, which is a remake of sorts. This also follows the Sonic Colors remake that released just a few years ago, and it does sound like Sega is maybe considering another Sonic remake here in the near future, or at least according to a few different insiders. Universal Nintendo first claimed that a Sonic Heroes remake is in development using Unreal Engine, and allegedly, it's set to release in 2025 for the Nintendo Switch successor, the PlayStation 5, Xbox, and of course, PC as well. Now, this has since been corroborated and also refuted all at the same time. Midori, who specializes in Sega leaks, this is a very credible insider when it comes to Sega and Atlas information, and according to them, the rumor is true that Sonic Heroes could possibly be the next Sonic remake, but as of right now, it's only being considered. There's nothing necessarily set in stone just yet, and that's also why you shouldn't expect a 2025 release as originally claimed by Universal Nintendo. In fact, Universal Nintendo has since updated their article to remove that claim that it would be out in 2025. Even still, though, I mean, this is a very interesting choice for Sega if they do end up remaking Sonic Heroes. I know a lot of fans would probably prefer the Sonic Adventure games, and, you know, I hope those get remade as well. I was a huge fan of Sonic Adventures 2 growing up on the Sega Dreamcast. That is still my absolute favorite Sonic game to this day. But something that I will say is that Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 are still readily available. You can turn on Steam right now and easily get both of those games, oftentimes with a very good discount. Whereas Sonic Heroes, on the other hand, I actually do have some good memories with this game as well, but the thing about it is that it's not readily available on modern platforms. So I think it's kind of a similar situation as Sonic Colors. That was a game that was stuck on the Wii, and the remake kind of brought it to a new audience. And I think that Sega is kind of looking at Sonic Heroes in a similar way. So for you Sonic fans out there, I mean, let me hear your thoughts about all of this. How do you feel about a possible Sonic Heroes remake before the beloved Adventure series? Now, moving on, though, here's some just fantastic news. About a month or so ago, in a surprise turn of events, Toys for Bob departed from Activision, and this raised all kinds of different questions about the future of games like Spyro, Crash, and, you know, even to some degree, the Banjo series as well. I have seen a lot of requests online for Toys for Bob to revive Banjo, similar to how they did Spyro and the Crash franchises, and while that does seem like the perfect fit, I don't know if Toys for Bob would actually do the Banjo series. There's rumors that a new Banjo has been in development for a while. Under who knows? But nonetheless, with their departure, some fans have been concerned about the future of these other games like Crash and Spyro. Well, you can now rest assured because Toys for Bob officially struck a deal with Microsoft. This news comes from Windows Central, and they confirmed that Toys for Bob and Microsoft have reached a partnership to work together on their first independent game together. After all, Toys for Bob seemed confident in this partnership when they first announced their departure from Activision, and the writing is just kind of on the wall by this point. Toys for Bob will continue to be the driving force for the Spyro and Crash Bandicoot games as long as the two wants to work together, which for the time being absolutely seems to be the case. In fact, in this very article, both Matt Booty from Xbox and also Toys for Bob suggested that whatever this new game is will be similar to their past work. Now, there's been rumors for a while that their next game will be Spyro related, presumably Spyro 4, and, you know, for me personally, that is incredibly exciting because this really is a great studio and we've needed a Spyro 4 for several decades by this point. Now, speaking of Xbox, though, I will continue to say that this has been a very, we'll say, strange year for the Xbox brand. They do have some very exciting games in the pipeline, and they have a ton of studios now. There's no doubt about any of that. In fact, they just acquired Activision Blizzard, as we just talked about a moment ago. They also have Game Pass, which always seems to be firing on all cylinders. But there are some valid questions when it comes to the business side of things, and that's something that Phil Spencer talked about today in a new interview with Polygon. He did once again point to their more multi-platform approach with games like Hi-Fi Rush and Sea of Thieves. We still do need to kind of see if that has long-term success for them. But interestingly, their business pivot doesn't seem to be just about porting their games to other platforms. It's also about opening up the Xbox walled garden to allow more competitors in. Now, what that means is that he wants other platforms to put their storefronts on Xbox consoles. Specifically, Epic Games was mentioned in this article, but from his wordage, it really just seems like he's open to the idea for everything, including the biggest PC storefront of them all, being Steam. I mean, this has been a dream scenario for years. I can't tell you how many times the community has just freaked out over the mere idea that Steam could come to something like Xbox. And well, based on Phil Spencer's response, it does sound like that he's at least open to the idea. We'll just go ahead and read this from the article. It says, considering our history as the Windows company, nobody would blink twice if I said, hey, when you're using a PC, you get to decide the type of experience you have by picking where to buy games. There's real value in that. Spencer believes console players would benefit from that freedom too, and so would console makers like Microsoft. Now, he continued to harp on breaking down barriers and how they make less sense in today's console environment. He basically explained that game budgets are just so much more expensive now, and the console industry isn't really growing. Now, we've extensively talked about this on the channel already, but the more that we hear about his future for Xbox, I think the more their plans start to take shape. You know, even the idea that Steam could possibly come to Xbox in the future, it almost makes Xbox sound more similar to PC, but with a console interface. This is also something that we just talked about with an Xbox handheld console. It does seem like they are trying to blur the line between PC and consoles. On consoles, you just simply turn it on and it simply works, with games specifically optimized for that hardware. So Steam being the biggest PC storefront by far, that would be massive news for the console industry. And not only would that be a big selling point for Xbox, but they would also have access to a ton more games that's only available on Steam. And I mean, you have to consider a $500 option that you can simply plug into your TV to play your Steam library. There would be an audience for that alone. But it's not just enticing for Xbox. I'd also say to a degree, this is an enticing option for Valve as well, to get their games on a console that sells tens of millions of units. That would only expand their reach just that much more. Now, however, would Xbox take a cut of a Steam game sold on Xbox? That is something to consider, just because Valve might not necessarily like that idea. But if the two could come to some kind of an agreement, this honestly could change the console business as we currently know it. This really would be massive news. There's also kind of a hidden bonus to all of this too, because ironically, I mean, if you think about this, if Steam were to come to Xbox, and this is a big if by this point, but if it did happen, that would also mean that Xbox would ironically get PlayStation games. You have to remember that Sony is now dropping a lot of their first-party games on Steam, and that seemingly is only going to increase going forward unless they make their own PC launcher. Now, that could happen, who knows, but theoretically, if Xbox somehow pulled this off, well, you'd be able to play Xbox games, Steam games, and PlayStation games as well, all on one single Xbox console. That is a pretty big deal, but, you know, nothing's confirmed yet. Just because Phil Spencer said he likes this idea, that doesn't necessarily mean anything will for sure happen. It's a loose possibility, but nothing is confirmed either. Let me know what you all think about this, though. Would you like to see Xbox open up their platform for competitors like Steam to put their storefronts on Xbox? Now let's go talk about a Dragon's Dogma 2 update and Capcom's future plans to kind of fix this game. I mean, this is really, I'd say, a frustrating situation just because Dragon's Dogma 2 is viewed as a good game. It's really just hindered by a few different problems that's led to some online controversy, specifically when it comes to microtransactions, and its overall performance. This is essentially another 30 FPS game, and even on a lot of PC rigs, it struggles to reach and maintain that 60 frames per second. Well, Capcom has now responded with a future roadmap. Now, there's no update set in stone just yet, but you can still see their plans here. It says, planned updates for Dragon's Dogma 2. Updates for all platforms, being PS5, Xbox Series, and Steam. They will be adding the option to start a new game when save data already exist. They'll also be changing the number of Art of Metamorphosis items available at pawn guilds in the game to 99. They're making the quest that allows players to acquire their own dwelling, where they can save and rest, available earlier in the game. They'll also be doing miscellaneous text display fixes and bug fixes as well. Then updates for PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S includes adding the option to switch motion blur to on and off in the options. They'll also be adding an option to switch ray tracing on or off. And they'll also give you the option to set frame rate to either variable or max 30 FPS in the options. Now, they did note that these options will not affect the frame rate significantly. Frame rate improvements are planned for future updates. Then, as for Steam, they're looking to improve quality when DLSS Super Resolution is enabled, and they're also looking to fix an issue where models appeared low quality under some specific settings. So when I read this, I really think the two big things here is, one, you'll soon be able to lock the frame rate to 30 FPS on consoles. I really have no idea why they didn't do this immediately. More or less, this is just going to make for better frame pacing because it's going to be more consistent. I mean, you have to consider that the PS5's VRR doesn't even activate unless it's 48 frames per second or more. So VRR does nothing for Dragon's Dogma 2 on the PS5. So I think locking the frame rate at no more than 30 frames per second will make this game feel a little bit more stable. The other big part here, though, is that they did confirm that there will be frame rate improvements in future updates. I think the only thing about that, though, is that if they can improve the frame rate, for one, you have to wonder by how much. Is it going to be significant, or is it just going to be small improvements? And also, if they can improve the frame rate, my question is just, why did they even launch Dragon's Dogma in the state that it's currently in? This news kind of makes it feel like they maybe rushed Dragon's Dogma 2 to the market, and the thing with that is that we still don't know the long-term repercussions of its negative word of mouth. I saw somebody on Twitter the other day brag about how its concurrent Steam players is proof that the launch issues doesn't really matter to the mass public because it does look like a success on paper, but that's not really how things work. Its launch success alone doesn't really tell us much about word of mouth. That's really just them cashing in on its launch hype. We still need to see if they can have healthy, long-term growth, and word of mouth is important on that front. And for that matter, if word of mouth was better at launch, who knows how much better those concurrent players could have been. I mean, you have to keep in mind just how powerful word of mouth can be. That's primarily how Baldur's Gate 3 and Palworld just blew up online. Those games didn't have a lot of marketing. It was really the word of mouth and player impressions that made them just so ultra successful. So this idea that negative word of mouth just doesn't matter, I think that's looking at things a little too short-sighted. I think we need to wait and see what happens going forward. But at the very least, Capcom does seem to be listening, and hopefully they can actually deliver on those improvements. Now, since we are talking about Dragon's Dogma 2, though, I did drop a new poll the other day. I know it's been a little while since I've done this, but I asked you all, despite Dragon's Dogma 2's microtransactions being unnecessary, as you can get them all in-game without purchasing them with real-life money, are you bothered by their inclusion? And the results here were actually very split. 50% of you said yes, while 41% of you said no. And this is one of those situations where I can kind of see both sides in their points. Like, it is kind of a weird situation in a sense that Dragon's Dogma 2 is not the first single-player Capcom game to have microtransactions. This is a fairly common thing when it comes to Capcom. Resident Evil 4 has one such example. This released just last year, and it also had single-player microtransactions. And the backlash wasn't nearly as bad as what we're seeing with Dragon's Dogma 2. Now, I do believe some of that is just because Dragon's Dogma 2 is less polished, so there's more to complain about, and, maybe it's a little bit harder to overlook. But the other thing, and I think this is what's standing out to a lot of people, is that those fast travel microtransactions are just a bad look. On one side, yes, you can unlock them without microtransactions, but for a lot of consumers, especially those that are new to the Dragon's Dogma series, you have to remember that the first game was not this massive success, so there are a lot of new people coming to the franchise for the first time, and these players, they're going to view fast travel as a readily available quality of life feature. So even if Capcom intended the world to be traveled without fast travel, the fact that they do have it linked to microtransactions, it just kind of makes it look like they're intentionally making that feature less accessible to push you into buying their microtransactions. Really, I think that if they had the fast travel just as is, where it's not easily accessible and you had to buy them with in-game money, and if they didn't have that link to microtransactions, I don't think people would care nearly as much, but I think the combination of the two, that's where it seems like people are having a lot of issues. For sure, though, I mean, there's a lot of noise online, and you're kind of seeing the results here as well. There definitely seems to be a large portion of consumers out there that are genuinely upset over the situation. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. Let me know what you all think about Xbox opening up their walled garden. Would you like to see Steam on Xbox? Let me hear it in the comments below. But until next time, peace out.